husband or reading one of the many books on her nightstand.
They're like
Sitting-
6 right now.
6? I know.
It's out of, I'm like, just, yeah, it's out of control.
I know. Those are some of those habits where you're like, oh, I will definitely get all the way through this book before I pick up another one. It's like, no, you won't. Why are you lying to yourself? Yeah. And I didn't realize you had 2 terriers. I thought you just had the one pup. That's wonderful.
Yeah, we adopted another one in March. She's like a mini schnauzer, and she thinks she is 200 pounds and a bouncer, but she is like 16 and just a little fierce lady. So yeah, she's been a challenge, but a joy, to see them kind of come out of their original state, that they enter your house in, and then they just slowly kind of warm up and calm down.
Yeah. Also, like, so many good therapy metaphors in that.
Like everything in my life.
I know, right?
I'll always relate it back to therapy somehow. So
I know everything becomes a metaphor. And then for those of you who don't know me and you found your way to this live stream via Christy, I'm Lindsay. I'm a mixed Filipina auntie living in the Midwest, born and raised here, and the founder of Mind Money Balance. At Mind Money Balance, as a certified financial therapist, I help people at the intersection of money and mental health. And I do a lot of work, I'm excited to say, helping different organizations and programs enhance their existing financial literacy content by talking about the emotional side of money. And I love my pup. I don't know, she's probably by my feet somewhere, helping to regulate my nervous system. And I love spending money and time with her. We are going to be talking about why is it so freaking hard to find a therapist, and also how do we financially afford to do so when so many of those good ones are out of network. And I specifically wanted to have this conversation with Christy because we've known each other on the business side of things, myself as a therapist and Christy as an SEO specialist and now owner of a therapy directory. And I thought it would be helpful for us to get different perspectives on why and how therapists are hard to find, and some tips that we've found being in the trenches as, me as a therapist and Christy as a therapy seeker who helps other therapists. So we wanted to make sure that this conversation helped you to feel seen and heard, and would love to hear from you. You can just drop an emoji in the chat. How frustrating has the therapy finding process made you? So just respond to the comments with an emoji. Like, what has it felt like to try and find a therapist? Christy, what emoji would you drop?
Which was like a marathon, it's just like the running guy where it's, it's just not this immediate thing. And I think having that expectation going into it is probably make it a little more frustrating maybe than it has to be. So, and that's the thing too. I mean, again, I've also been out of therapy since I was a teen. And I think it's also a marathon in the sense that it's like, you're probably not going to be fixed after your, first or second one or 50th or 100th therapy session, like whatever, fixed in the biggest air quotes. But I would say the marathon,
the little runner. I feel that because the emoji that came to mind was kind of how you feel. I've never run a marathon and don't plan to, but after running a marathon, and it was just like the little person with the Z's by it, just like so tired, so exhausting, and just like, and again, you're a person who knows how the internet works, and I'm a person who's a literal therapist. And for both of us, we have had struggles. So if you're just hopping in, drop an emoji in the comments of what the therapy seeking or therapy finding process has been like. And as you kind of drop your emoji in, we're going to get into the very first question. So Christy, take it away. Why is it so freaking hard to find a therapist?
Yeah, I mean, so many factors there. And I think the absolute first thing that we need to acknowledge in this conversation at all is just how broken our mental health system is. And it's not anyone's fault here. It's not the therapist's fault. It's really the fault of how, insurance companies, mental health startups, all those companies are really just negatively affecting how therapists, first and foremost, can make a living. And I think that actually is a very trickle down, effect for how people can find a therapist, since many people understandably want to find a therapist that's in network with their insurance company. But you will get into this more, but it is so difficult for therapists to be in network with insurance companies for many reasons. And that often means that people have limited options, whether that be, is there anyone who's available for me? Or maybe I'm looking for someone who's the same race as I am, or is the same religious background, or not a certain religious background. And having that kind of therapist who's aware of your background for some people is really important. And then when you're just out of choices because of like your, insurance company, I think that's probably number one. And number two is maybe just not entirely knowing what to look for, especially if you're the first person in your life to go to therapy. Maybe we have some first goers in the chat here, the ones who kind of started the trend in their family and friends. It's like, you just don't know what to look for. So I think, the insurance company systemic stuff is absolutely the thing that makes it the most difficult. And then though obviously there's all the logistic issues. Is this therapist even accepting clients? Why won't they email me back? I filled out this form and sent it out into the ether and I didn't hear back for weeks. And when they did get back to me, they're like, I'm so sorry, I don't have any openings. Like, logistically, it's really tough too, especially when it is a very tender time emotionally. It's a very vulnerable process. Then to feel like you're getting, hitting wall after wall, it takes a lot of resilience to get through that process. So as courageous as it is to finally decide to start seeking help, then to run into this process that's really demoralizing, honestly. Like, and then once you find your therapist, yeah, it's the best, but the process can be anything but easy. So
Yeah. So I heard it's a systems issue, it's a logistics issue, it's also a lack of education and understanding of just saying, "Hey, I need a therapist," but not knowing what type of therapy you're looking for. When
mhm,
I think about my experience trying to find a therapist, I grew up in rural Michigan.
mhm,
And because of the lack of mental health care providers, my
yeah,
mom and I had to see the same therapist, which is so unethical, but it was the only option that we had. And
mm,
now I'm in a county that has the highest number of mental health care providers in my state, like
shout
per
out Washington.
capita. Yeah. And it's funny, Christy. Well, not funny, is that because there is such a shortage of mental health care providers, even though I supposedly live in a very rich mental health care or resource rich area, it doesn't really matter because the entire state is struggling to find mental health care
Mhm,
providers. So everyone in the state is trying to get care from a very concentrated area. So it
mhm,
has been the literal access for me that has been the most challenging, that makes it so
mhm,
hard to find a therapist. And then kind of the opposite thing that happened when I was younger, as I mentioned, there just weren't any therapists where I grew up. So the options were limited. And this was like, maybe AOL dial-up days. There was no such thing as telehealth then. And then now, as a therapist, I have this extra fun challenge, which is I need a really good qualified therapist who I don't know professionally or personally. So then I
mm,
have to like take the
mhm,
idea of like, okay, a colleague of mine used to work there. I think they mentioned one person that they know that might have the training that I'm after, but was I ever in a class with them, or did I,
mm,
it becomes an
mhm,
extra layer of chaos.
yeah,
But yeah, so those are some of the reasons that I've experienced it being difficult to find a therapist. Um, and speaking of you and how you ended up in this line of work, because you're not a therapist, how did you get interested specifically in helping out therapists through both of your businesses, Therapy SEO, and now Therapy, Best Therapist, the directory?
yeah. So I was, I'm sure many therapists can relate. I was in like the "you're a good listener" to "you should be a therapist" pipeline, like, oh, you're empathetic and a good listener. You should do that, you know? And so you're 17 and you pick your what degree you're gonna get. So I was in that, and I did love it. I loved my degree. I loved all of the internships I did. But by the time I was just wrapping up my undergraduate degree, I was just like, I shouldn't help people. That doesn't sound like a good idea quite yet. But I never lost, the fascination with psychology and how passionate I was about mental health. So
Yeah.
I started developing other skills in writing and website design and marketing. And, I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to, be niched within a marketing, not only marketing specialty, but within a certain population. And immediately it was like, I want to help therapists, that I can still be in this field. I can still help this population that I'm very passionate about, therapists, but use my abilities that I've honed this way, but also ones that I knew would be personally sustainable for me. Like I knew thinking about therapy, I was like, I don't know how therapists do it. I think I could see like 2 people a week. Like I think that would be my caseload if I were a therapist. So
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to do it this way so I can still participate. I can still support the field, be an
Yeah.
advocate in different ways. But the profession itself is not for me. But I love therapists and I love therapy.
We didn't plan this answer to dovetail so nicely, but at the very start of our live stream today, the question I asked folks of like what was the best tip you ever got from a therapist or the best piece of advice you got from a therapist? And I mentioned having my therapist explain to me the ecosystemic model for social change, which what a mouthful. But basically the idea is that not every single person has to move towards social change in the exact same way. And I heard that that's what you did. You're like, I don't have to be a therapist, but the way that I can contribute to improving the field of mental health is through this particular skill set of storytelling and guiding people on how to get there. And so how lovely that it just worked all together. So
Yeah, it feels
yeah.
that way. It's just kind of like you go through your life, it's kind of like you're just like a little avalanche. You're just kind of accumulating all the stuff as you're going down the mountain of life, and then you just kind of end up where you are. But yeah, I definitely feel that way. And I think, and I really think of, the calling, like the difference that I want to make on the world. It's just helping therapists have practices that are very sustainable because I care about therapists, but then I know the care that people are going to receive is going to be so much better because the therapists are cared for. So I feel like at the end of the day, like that's the thing that I'm really passionate about, that I try to support in both the marketing agency and the therapist director recently started. Yeah.
Can you say more about that? And when I say more about that, I mean, be really specific with what is it that you do in those agencies and why are you saying things like when the therapist is well cared for, they're providing good care? Can you expand on that piece of things?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say primarily in my marketing agency, which is where I, started getting into this world, I work with private practice therapists that need to, because they're in business now, they need to market their businesses. And one of the main reasons, from my understanding, after talking to hundreds, maybe thousands at this point of therapists about this stuff, is that they knew that, you know, what they were doing before, whether being, at another agency or working for, some mental health startups or whatever, they just were not making a living wage. And a lot of it just comes down to that and like, that's America. Money is important in our society. We need it. And therapists are often riddled with student debt. They've had thousands of all these clinical hours, and then they wind up at these companies where, at some companies, I've heard rates as low as $25 an hour after taxes. What is that? So it's like to make ends meet, they just have to see so many, clients per week. And of course, that takes a toll on a therapist. And then, we can always bring it back to the quality of care that someone receives, so those are the types of therapists that I work with. The the businesses that are like, I need to, this isn't working for me anymore. This isn't working for my clients anymore. And so they kind of exit part of the mental health system almost, in a way. They're just deciding, I'm not doing that. Typically, the businesses that I work with, they're not in network with any insurance companies because they're just not going to get the fee that they need to live, to take care of themselves, to take care of their families, to save for their future, like basic things that everyone, deserves to have. So
Yeah, yeah. So this idea of when a therapist is well taken care of and also compensated fairly for their work, the likelihood is that they will be, or the idea here is that they will be less likely to be burnt out, to be taking on clients that aren't a good fit, and are going to be seeing the types of clients who they are best suited to help. That's the thing about finding a therapist, is just because somebody has a credential behind their name does not mean that they are appropriate for your specific needs. Why would you say, like, what the typical therapy finding or therapy seeking process is like? And what I mean by that is, you and I both talked about how we kind of, what struggles we've had to try and find a therapist, but you've been on kind of the back end of watching people
Mhm.
go through the therapy finding process. I think a big frustration for a lot of people who are seeking a therapist is, I thought I would just call the number on my insurance card, or I thought I would just Google it
Mhm.
and I would find someone. Can you kind of walk us through what that typical process is like if I'm a therapy seeker trying to find a therapist?
Yeah, and I think there are a few ways. What's kind of cool is I found all of my therapists in different ways, which I think is really good perspective. Now I know the way that I really like to do it because, again, like I'm on the back end of this stuff, so I could kind of, and I've helped a lot of my friends find therapists and stuff like that. Um, but I think there are three kind of main ways. I would say four, I guess. So the first is obviously, going into your insurance dashboard and just like scrolling through who's there. Second would be a directory, whether that's Psychology Today, whether that's more of like a matching type services, whether it's with your insurance or if it's more of just like a personality, like they'll have little quizzes and they'll give you a few options. Or so there are a few different ways to do it, but therapist directories is a really big one. It's one of the reasons I started this other therapist directory. We're a little bit different. Maybe we can talk about that later. Third, I think, is by referral. So, if you know someone, they're in therapy, or you're just kind of like bringing it up casually, kind of putting the feelers out there. Who do they see? Do they like them? Do you feel like you would personally be a good fit with them? Stuff like that. And then finally is just, good old Google, my comfort zone, and for the most part, if someone is looking for a therapist via Google, I would just say put in therapist, maybe the specialty that you're looking for, or like the modality that you're looking for, your city or your state, and then just go through the results. And obviously, it's like a little bit of digging and research. But I find that Google is a really good way to find the specialists. Depending on your state, sometimes, for some reason, certain states or cities, like therapists just don't really care about their websites as much. So they might not as like, spend as much time on making sure that who they help is clearly written on their website, which is what Google would pick up. But I think those are four of the main ways now that I have used, people in my life have used. So.
Yeah, I love how I mean, I don't think you did this on purpose, but you listed them kind of in the order of the way that I also see people seeking therapists. Is
Mhm.
they kind of try it on their own. They call their insurance, they call whatever healthcare system they're in. They try a directory. They do the little word of mouth, like, who are you seeing? Are they taking new clients? Are they at a group? Like, and then the piece about Google that I want to spend a moment on is, like, what do you do if you've never had therapy before, or maybe you're seeking out therapy, you're a parent and you're seeking out therapy for a child, and you don't know like the specialty or the modality? You gave some good hints about, if I was looking for a therapist in Colorado, I might type in best therapist, Colorado CBT. But what if I
Mm.
don't know the modality or the specialty? What kind of terms
Mhm.
could I type into Google to help me find a good therapist?
Yeah, and I think that's where there's kind of this research self-discovery process that's like a little bit of prep work. If it's a marathon, this is your training, I guess, if we were to use that metaphor. But I would put some of the thoughts that you have, I'd put some of the symptoms that you have into Google and start seeing like what sorts of maybe diagnoses or, just concepts in the world of psychology and therapy are coming up for you. Read it. Guarantee there are going to be some pieces where you're like, oh my God, that's me, So
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
take some of those terms and put yourself into that. But maybe you consult with a therapist and they're like, I feel like this is more going on. Here's someone that I recommend for that. It's just like try your best to place yourself in a bucket. And even if that isn't successful and like you didn't, perfectly accurately, place yourself in some kind of, issue or struggle that you're having, you'll at least have gained a lot of insight on a lot of that stuff. And I think psychoeducation is one of the main benefits of therapy is you're just learning more about this stuff. So if you can do a little research on your own, that's actually probably going to prepare you for having an even better therapy experience.
Yeah. So I heard a little bit of like, well, I think you said it's a self discovery process too. As you're
Mhm,
searching for a therapist, you might use terms like can't sleep at night. What
mhm,
type of therapy do I need for that?
mhm,
Or struggling with racing thoughts at work, or I get anxious
mm,
before presentations. So being really clear about the different things you're experiencing and then just playing around with like what type of therapist treats this or what type of
mhm,
um therapist helps with these things. And as you kind of play around on Google, you can get closer and closer to the type of specialist that you might need, or if you're searching for a family member or loved one that they might need. I'm also thinking of just normalizing that it is a process. And as a therapist, I would invite people to do whatever they can to take care of themselves
mhm,
during the process of finding a therapist. As both Christy and I mentioned,
mhm,
there would be nothing better than to be like, ooh, I'm having a bit of racing thoughts and I'm feeling a little sweaty and I'm feeling really anxious all the
mhm.
time. I really need a therapist, and getting a therapist that day.
Yeah.
But the problem is that, as we shared earlier, our system is not designed that way. And unfortunately, for a lot of these mental health startups that claim to be get a therapist today or tomorrow, what they're
Mhm.
doing is they're under compensating the therapist for the work. And unfortunately, that means they're seeing something like 40, 50 clients a week, and they're ripe for burnout. And it's not, I don't want to say like, oh, it's the clinician's fault. We're all doing what we can to try and
Yeah,
get by. But if you
absolutely.
want a really high quality therapist, that might take a little bit of time. And a lot of high quality therapists, they're going to be working off of a wait list, unfortunately, too. So
Mhm,
doing what you can to take care of other aspects of your life while you work on
mhm,
improving your mental health. So
mhm,
maintaining your friendships, moving your body, getting good sleep, practicing things such as mindfulness, and being attuned or attentive to what's going on. All of those things can be helpful. It doesn't mean it's going to speed up the process, but I want for you to know that you have to continue taking care of yourself as you go on this journey of finding a therapist.
mhm.
You shared some good ideas of like how people find a therapist. What are some of the tips that you might extend to somebody now based on either your personal experience or what's changing in the way that we seek out a therapist today?
Yeah, it's so interesting because we were talking about this the other day where, I truly feel that I've learned something from every therapist that I've worked with. I definitely think I received superior care from certain providers. That's just kind of the reality. So I would say, a lot of times when you're finding a therapist, I think really focusing on, obviously, I think there are some signs to look out for. Um, if their fees seem kind of suspiciously low, or maybe you have like $25 copay for 50 minutes of someone's time. Like, or, some of these mental health startups match with your perfect therapist and you pay us $50 a month. Like, kind of use common sense a little and be like, does this sound shady? Or does this sound like someone's getting the short end of the stick? They probably are.
Right.
It's
Right.
like this, it's
Mhm.
it's pretty like use your common sense when you see that sort of thing, because I understand like sometimes you're just in a tight spot. You really, really need help at that time, but know that just because you really need help and you expect it to be this certain price, you are then kind of asking your therapist to like compensate for you. So
Mm.
it's like, well, I like to go get drinks with my friends every Thursday, but I can only afford this $25 copay. It's like, so you're kind of asking your therapist, you can't do happy hour with your friends because I want that.
Mm.
So even just like,
Interesting. Yeah.
it's a simple shift, but it's kind of like there's a give and take to this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I heard if you're struggling to kind of find a therapist, how can you discern what might be moving you in the direction of finding a good therapist or the best therapist for you? And so just running things through that critical thinking lens and being like, does it feel like somebody or something doesn't add up? Then probably
Yeah.
something or something doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing that I will add as you're going through the therapy seeking process is that one of the go-to lines that I'm sharing with folks who either want to work with me and we're doing a little check-in call before we work together,
Mm,
or even, excuse me, in our first couple of sessions, I'm saying to them, look, the research continues to show that no matter what trainings or credentials are
mm,
behind a person's name, who is a licensed therapist, what continues to be one of the best indicators of change toward your overall mental health well-being is whether or not you and that therapist click. And I tell
mm.
people, I'm not a blank slate therapist. I am not going to sit here and nod with a stoic look on my face. My clients consistently tell me a version of like, oh my God, I'm so glad your face just did that. Or thank you
Mhm.
for saying so much with your eyes. And it's not because I'm trying to like get pats on the back, but it's because my clients who vibe with me, they
Mhm.
like a more expressive therapist. They
Yeah.
aren't really craving somebody who's just going to reflect with them and sit with them and just say, tell me more. Not that those skills and tools aren't helpful, but the
Mhm.
types of clients who I'm a better fit for are the ones who also have an interest in potentially a more active client therapist relationship. So anyway, I'm always telling my clients, if you
Mhm.
don't vibe with me, just because I have LMSW or CFT behind my name doesn't mean that you have to keep seeing me. By all means, if you're
Mhm.
getting in to a few sessions and you're like, Lindsay, you seem like a very lovely person. However, I need somebody who is going to be more directive, or I want someone who is going to maybe pause more and sit more and really invite me to think more. Those are great things to name and note. And then I'm going to say, cool, let's see what I can do. I can try and shift things around in my therapeutic approach. But at the end of the day, I am who I am and I do therapy the
Mhm.
way that I do it, not to blow you off for advocating for yourself, but to say, here's my style, here's my personality. If we don't click, it's not a problem on you. It's not a problem on me. But what I can do is say, hey, I've got a colleague who actually has kind of the more like chilled, slow, mellow
Mhm.
vibe that I'm hearing you're craving. And we have a similar training. I know they're credentialed, but they might be a better fit for you. And when we're talking about client therapist fit, we're not just talking about, oh, you have anxiety, so you need CBT because that's been proven to be an
Right.
evidence based practice. Yes. And we're also talking about, do you feel safe talking to your therapist? Do you feel like you're kind of putting on a show when you get into the room with them of trying to be the
Mm,
good client? Do you feel like you're holding
mhm,
things back because you're
mhm.
fearful of being judged? Or you feel like, as you mentioned earlier, Christy, you might want a therapist who's of the same race or ethnicity or religion as you, and you just want somebody who gets it and you don't have to explain it to them? Those are all valid reasons to say, hey, I think we're a fit or I think we're not. So I think as you go through this therapy seeking process, I would also invite folks to think about whether or not they actually like their therapist.
Yes, just like chemistry, it's like, can
Yes.
obviously, your therapist is not your friend, there's some
Yes.
boundaries there, but, like, can you envision yourself just, like, grabbing a cup of coffee with that person?
Yeah.
Do you feel
Yeah.
like you guys could have really interesting conversations outside of therapy? And, of
Mhm.
course, the bottom line, do you feel safe with that person?
Yeah.
That's probably number 1, but, yeah, I think your relationship with your therapist is probably, at least in my experience, like, the number 1 predictor of a good outcome. However
Totally.
long, that relationship is, but, yeah, I think just having that comfortability and that just kinda basic chemistry, and obviously you're not necessarily gonna get that in a 15 or 10, 15-minute consultation,
Yeah.
but, within a few sessions, you should kind of have a sense of, yeah, like, even if you feel like you're very different from that person, but you still just kind of have that chemistry, I think that is absolutely the thing to look out for.
Yeah, yeah. So let's say you have finally found your therapist. You've Googled, you've called them, you've done the little vibe check, and it is go time. And they say, my fee is X hundreds of dollars per session. And you're like, okay, now what? And they also tell you,
Mm,
and I don't take insurance. What are
mhm,
some tips that you offer to people of how to help their out of pocket costs? And for folks who don't
mm.
know that lexicon or that language, it means how do you help people who maybe pay a fee for service and are trying to seek therapy? What are some ideas you have for therapy seekers to reduce the amount of money they have to spend on therapy?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always sliding scales. Some therapists offer, maybe a reduced fee depending on your income. Some therapists don't. So it's just going to kind of be dependent. So I think that's always one thing you could ask for if finances are definitely challenging for you at that time. Totally understand that. One thing that I've been super excited about lately, and Lindsay and I have been talking about this, is taking advantage of your out of network benefits. I think we don't really think about that very often because we're always, just trying to like keep things in network, whether that's getting an MRI or your primary care doctor, of course. But some of the benefits can actually be pretty good. Like I actually was just submitting some of my claims Thursday or something, because you can just get reimbursed for, part of the session. So the therapist gets their full fee and you still actually get to take advantage of your insurance. So that is something I absolutely recommend doing. Lindsay and I both have collaborated with Mentaya before, Mentaya. They'll do all of your reimbursables for you, and they just take like a little fee for the amount that you get back, and it's no hassle. Like they do everything for you. So it's more money up front when you're paying for therapy, but then you start getting some back. Um, so that's another thing. And then I don't think there's maybe a few people better in the world to comment on this than Lindsay, but then I think it's a matter of reprioritizing your values. Your money needs to match your values. And I think, when there are times when I'm not in therapy, there are times that I'm in therapy, and now when there's a time that I'm in therapy, I kind of see it as like this separate chapter in my life. And during that chapter, maybe I'm extra nice to myself. And when I'm feeling guilty, it's like, ah, we talked about anxiety in my last session, and here I am doing this or that. That's an opportunity to give myself more grace. And like, I see it as just like a whole different time in my life, right? And part of that is how my budget looks, right? So it's like, maybe I'm buying less clothes at that time, or I'm not traveling as much, or maybe I didn't get to see this friend or go on that weekend trip because my budget looks like my values and my priorities at that time, and that's in therapy and my mental health. So that's another thing. I just think take a really critical look at your budget. Do you, maybe you like to get your nails done, or maybe you actually have some vices that maybe could use a little kicking, and that could actually be better used towards therapy. So I think those are the things that have helped me the most or helped people in my life. But I think if you kind of shuffle things around, or maybe even don't see your therapist every week, lots of therapists are open to a less regular schedule if you're able to work with them, because they're like your soulmate therapist or whatever. So there are things to do. It's definitely not going to be as cheap as going in network. If you want cheap therapy, maybe that's some food for thought if that's what you're looking for. But those are some things that I've done and I've recommended.
Yeah. Yeah, good, great recommendation. So one is like the very tactical piece, which is look at how your money is being spent and potentially temporarily shift things around to make that investment in your mental health care. Check with your out of network benefits. A service like Mentaya can be super helpful. And then also just reminding yourself that this is, you and I are specifically using the word investment, not because it's like a cool, kitschy thing to do, but much like we take care of other aspects of our health, we invest in walking our bodies, we invest in getting good quality sleep, we invest in nurturing friendships and relationships with people in our lives. We also invest in our mental health care. And how the other thing I would add to what you shared, I love those tips, is that I'm of the philosophy, again, this is like a vibe check thing.
Mhm.
I don't typically work with clients for years and years and years and years. I
Mhm.
often do, because financial therapy is so specialized, I see people for a much shorter amount of time. And so for me, I often think about how can we temporarily look at this as a change to your spending plan. So
Yeah.
temporarily, how can we increase your income and reduce expenses? Because the hope is that once you get some of the skills of working with me or another qualified therapist,
Yep.
you won't have to be in therapy twice a week or every week or whatever the cadence is. And to your point, Christy, over time, I love for my clients, if they were seeing me weekly, to move back to every other week
Yep.
or once a month. We want to give people that option. And as you do that, obviously, you help to decrease the out of pocket expenses.
Mhm.
And the other thing, I think you mentioned this when we chatted before, but is remembering that therapy is usually something that you can put on your HSA or FSA card.
Yes.
So if you
Forgot to
have
mention
that,
that.
yeah, so if you have that from your employer, remember that you can pay for that with some of those tax advantaged accounts.
Mhm.
And I also think, going back to what we talked about earlier, if it's going to take a couple of months to get into therapy, then you can spend that time as you're,
Save.
waiting for that intake. Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. To set a
Mhm.
little bit of money aside for it. And the other tip that I have is see if your therapist offers any groups or
Mhm.
self-paced educational workshops. So
Mhm.
group therapy can typically be less out of pocket for you because the idea is that the therapist gets a smaller amount from everybody, but is seeing four,
Yeah.
6, or 8 people at a time. And many therapists nowadays, because of the shortage of mental health care providers, have things like, my book right behind me, or they have things like courses. And it doesn't mean that you can't get in and see them in therapy, but it can serve as that bridge, and often a much more low cost bridge. So someone shared, I always forget that you can use an FSA or HSA for therapy. Yes, you can. And you
Yes.
should, especially
I
that
forget too.
FSA. Yeah, that rolls, that doesn't roll over at the end of the month. I would love, Christy, as much as you're comfortable, like
Mm.
what kind of outcomes you have experienced when you have invested in therapy,
Mm.
and committed to making your mental health a priority.
Mm. So I think I want to quick touch on the money stuff,
Oh
but this
yeah,
is kind of
of
like an
course.
indirect, yeah, right.
Yeah.
But this is kind of an indirect effect of my experience with a really, really good therapist is like I ended up making more money because I kind of like figured some shit out. in my life, and I
Oh,
know that
so
doesn't sound
interesting.
like, a total thing, but in therapy, you're talking not just about, like, your mom and dad, like, you're talking about work, you're talking about probably money because it's such a huge stress on most people, um, and then you might be surprised, like, do they give you the courage or give you the coping mechanisms or the confidence in yourself to be able to ask for a raise?
Yeah.
Or, do they encourage you to follow, like, some of your passions that give you
Mm.
joy? All of a sudden you're making candles on the weekends and now you're selling them for 20 bucks at a farmer's market. Like, you just don't know. So I think that is one thing that I actually did benefit from. And I've done like coaching as well. Therapy coaching, can
Yeah.
both be so valuable. And they just helped me make more money. So then those therapists that are really good, did become more feasible as well. So it's just, that's not, I'm not saying that's like in every case scenario.
Yeah. But I love that aside, that in investing in therapy, it actually not only improved your mental health, but it sounds like it gave you permission or the ability to kind of look within and making sure you were being compensated appropriately at your work and things like that. So it actually the investment paid off quite literally, not not in like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, okay, I am sleeping better. I'm not as anxious or whatever your symptoms were, but also like, oh, I negotiated a raise or I charged more for my
Mhm.
services and I actually was able to earn more money when I was taking care of my mental health. I popped in the
Mhm.
chat as you were talking, Christy. What's something that people who are watching today can do to make their therapy more financially accessible? Christy and I
Mhm.
talked about using some of these different tools, but if there's something in particular that you're like, oh, I could maybe temporarily stop spending on this, or maybe temporarily could try out this side hustle to make
Mhm.
financial or to make therapy more accessible. Would love to hear from y'all because it is so helpful to hear from others how they are taking the time to financially invest in therapy. So somebody shared therapy is a great investment. Yes, it is. It absolutely
Mhm.
is. So Christy, while people are kind of sharing what they might do to make therapy more accessible to them, let's go back to you. What are some of the things that have happened to you, again, as much as you're comfortable sharing,
Mhm.
because of your investment in a good therapist?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, truly, I talk about this stuff a lot, and I always say that my life really turned around when I started working with my soulmate therapist, I call her. Still see her, not as frequently because I'm actually seeing other types of therapists now, but like, she's, like we just have that kind of like close bond, and we always know we're going to be kind of somehow like in each other's life, and she's just been like such a yeah, I don't like to use the word blessing very much, but I really feel like that she has been. So I think, the main benefits of therapy that I experienced was improving my relationships. I felt like a lot, either if it was ending certain relationships that I was like, ooh, that's not so good for me anymore, or improving ones that were really important to me and recognizing obviously the hurt that had been done to me, but also kind of like my role in that. And it's like, how am I kind of affecting this? And um, now I have, these really important relationships in my life. I feel like we are set up for success because it felt like I was having like 50% of what I could have had with them. And now I'm having not 100, who has 100% in some of our more fraught relationships, but like closer to that, right? It's like I feel like the relationship is better. Um, Family, friends, my husband and I have done couples and stuff too. That itself is so invaluable because what else is life about, than the people in our life? So obviously improving relationships is the biggest one. I'd say a general sense of like thriving. I think it's kind of like a word we use comically because it is kind of a funny concept, but to think about where there are times in your life where you feel like you're just kind of getting by. That's not always a good feeling. And then to have the purpose of therapy, obviously to address mental health concerns, of course. But then to have this even greater goal of how can I like exceed my expectations for my life and me,
Yeah.
Therapy helps you just reach this level of just this kind of like this peace and satisfaction with life that, you know, I don't know. It just changes everything.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the peace is what I pursue. I don't even like pursue happiness anymore.
Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
emotion. It lasts like 15 minutes, and everyone's just like dying to have it. It's like if I feel happy sometimes, that's amazing. And I like savor every second of it. But for the most part, I just look for like contentment, satisfaction, resilience, and
Mm.
those kinds of like bigger things that I find are best pursued with the help of, I think many therapists are just wise people,
Yeah.
and it's like having that kind of wisdom in your life, it's you save years of lost relationships, of, poor mental health, of whatever, just because they're helping you advance so much quicker and getting to that kind of baseline, or even just like that kind of like thriving, even if there are moments, those moments of just like, God, like, look how far I've come.
Wow. Thank you for being so open to share the things that you've received out of investing in therapy. I heard improved communication skills that therefore improved your relationships, overall increase in contentment. And it sounds like resilience, like the ability to deal with things that came your way.
Mhm,
And and it also sounds like an increase in self-trust and in
mhm,
self-insight. And what I loved about what you said, like toward the very end of that, Christy, was what it did was prevented me, I'm paraphrasing, from like having to slog through the mud on my own and getting somebody else on the outside to help me view things and to speed up the process of figuring life out and figuring out
mhm,
what the meaning of your version of contentment and feeling
mhm,
good and feeling safe is. I love that. Somebody shared in the chat when we were talking about how can you make therapy more accessible to you financially. Someone shared making sure to check with reimbursements offered by your employer. A lot of them
mhm.
offer like personal development reimbursements, which I hadn't
Oh,
thought of, but I
nice.
love that idea. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
Um,
amazing.
yeah, wow. I don't know that like I have a one thing that I've gotten out of therapy. I think one thing that I always find helpful about investing in therapy is it's I mean, it's gonna sound very it just is what it is. It's like the more I learn, the less I know. And what I mean by that
Mm,
is it gives me a level of humility and a
mm,
reminder of the things that are in my control and out of my control. And I find that that's a lesson that I need again and again. And I need it in different ways and the focus to be on different life domains depending on what's happening in my life, right? So at certain times
mm,
when I was in therapy, the focus was solely on my mental health symptoms. Then there were other
totally.
times I was in therapy that were much more about how do I relate to others around me? And then there were other
Mm,
times in therapy that was much more about what a healthy boundary looks like for me and with others. And then, as I shared
mm,
most recently, it's been about how can I stay physically, mentally, and emotionally safe during turbulent social justice
mm,
times. So for
mhm,
me, it's like investing in all of that gives me the space to say, here's what I have control over, here's what I don't. Here are the things that are the most important in this season of life, be it
mhm,
mental health symptom management or communication skills. So that for me has been so helpful. And I imagine I'll be in and out of therapy forever, not because I mentioned earlier that I don't see clients forever and ever. And it's not because I don't believe in the value of therapy. I do. And I believe there are certain times in our lives where we need it more and certain times in our lives where we're like, oh, okay, depending on the severity of your
mhm,
life. But I really love the agency to be able to go in and out of therapy to say, hey, I could use a little extra help for the next 6 months, or to be able to say,
mhm,
I've got enough coping skills and tools and people in my corner to
mhm.
manage this particular season of life. So that's also something that I've gotten out of therapy. All right. So I think we've covered so much about why therapists are hard to find, what we can do to help ourselves financially invest in one. I have to ask you a question selfishly because you're on the Mind Money Balance YouTube channel, Christy. What is something you're doing or maybe have done recently that helps you to have your mind and money in balance?
Mm. Yeah, I think there's so many. I absolutely believe in financial wellness. And I think one of the things that is most beneficial for me, if you can tell, I'm a big picture existential person. So for me, like I regularly have conversations with my husband about what matters in our life. And then we shuffle our finances around based on that. And those like they're not infrequent conversations. Um, because different times are going to require different things. Whether that's supporting, our family financially, or we really want to save up for this. Or maybe I just want that pair of shoes because I freaking want them. It's like it's whatever that kind of value looks like at that time. So I always like to make sure that my budget reflects what I really want out of life, because it's really easy just to like do stuff because everyone else is doing it, or getting that meal, or everyone's getting athleta, whatever. Again, this I clearly don't know money out enough to like even I did not pull that statement off, whatever. But anyways, like you know what I mean.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's just like, what are my values? What do I really want out of my life?
Mm.
And how is my money supporting those?
I love that. I would love to hear from folks as we kind of move into Christy sharing kind of specifically what she's doing with Best Therapists to make the therapy seeking process a bit easier. As you've listened to our conversation about why, we obviously used our lens of why investing in mental health is so good, knowing that there are a million different reasons why investing in your mental health care is so important. But what's something that might change? What's something that you might do differently if you said, I'm going to prioritize investing in my mental health? And drop it in the chat. As a reminder, the chat won't be available on the replay. So what's something you might do differently if you said, hey, I'm going to spend this time, this money, this space, this energy taking care of my mental well-being? What might happen? So go ahead and think on that and drop it in the comments. And Christy, tell us how Best Therapists might be able to help some folks here who are seeking therapy find their, to use your words, soulmate
Mhm.
therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So my primary, skill that I make most of my income on is search engine optimization, or how to get someone's website showing up high in the Google search results. So that's like my main thing. And so the idea came out of first, how can I use that skill to support the population I care about, therapists in the future as Google changes, right? AI, increased competition, all this stuff. I was like, what am I gonna do, for these therapists, because things are just changing. So, I came up with a therapist directory, but I was like, there are so many, and I don't want them to have that same experience that they have. And I don't want therapy seekers having the same experience where they go on Psychology Today and comb through 20 pages of results, thousands of therapists per city. I was like, I just feel like there has to be, maybe not always a better, but a different way, to do a therapist directory. So, I decided with my team that on our pages, we're only going to show 5 to 6 therapists on a page. And how they got there, how they kind of, I don't like the word earn, but how they were able to secure one of those placements is because they passed a vetting process we have for them. And essentially what that means is we have done a bunch of research for you. So we checked their Yelp, we checked their Google business, we had their peers vouch for them on their abilities. We're checking Google News to make sure nothing like crazy unethical was reported, to anyone. So basically it means they're passing this process that we've laid out. So we feel confident that these therapists, like we're called Best Therapists, besttherapist.com, because we want, the therapists on our website, our directory, to be some of the best out there. So when you're looking for a therapist, there's kind of one less obstacle, which is this person actually going to be good? Because like you don't know until you start, right? But if at least you can know that they don't see more than 20 clients per week, they said that they, are adamantly against racism, homophobia, all of the phobias and isms, like they're not that kind of person. They're going to be hopefully a safe space for you. We've done that. So one less obstacle for people to find a therapist is essentially what our vision is for it.
I love that. I think it's so helpful as a person who's been on different directories and has also looked through many directories. It can be so confusing and overwhelming to know, like, what does this little badge mean? And for you to say
Mhm.
it's not just us saying, oh yes, this person's license is active, like most of
Mhm.
the badges are, or
Right.
even a lower bar. Some of those badges just mean, yes, this person paid to have their name listed on our directory. But for you to say, no, if they are listed on our directory, we've done some of the hoop jumping to
Mhm.
make it a less stressful situation as you are seeking out a therapist. So I'm so glad you are bringing that resource out and rolling it out and helping more folks who are ready for good mental health care to
Mhm.
find their best therapist and
Yeah.
to move toward investing in their mental health. And again, just like what a cool thing that today it just continues to weave in that we each play a different role and how we care for one another and what we do and how
Mhm.
we do it, and the way that you're doing it is so special and so unique. And for everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. If there were specific things that you loved about this stream, please feel free to forward it on to a friend. It will like be buffering for a little bit, but as I mentioned, then those comments will come down and your name will not be associated with this. So it'll be a bit anonymous. And then eventually in that description box, you'll see links to Christy's Best Therapist directory, and then some of the other things that we mentioned today. Thanks again, Christy, for being here. It was such a
Thank you for
treat.
having me.
Oh, my pleasure.